Full order. Say the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Also, just like to take a moment of silence for the 13 servicemen and women lost in Afghanistan. And just another moment of silence for the Afghan people who are going through difficult times, who were lost this week. Thank you. I'm going to go through the superintendent recommendations. The motion of consent for recommendations A, personnel matters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So carried. Should we open the school minute?
Second table is the overview of our opening safety protocol. Also on the website, people review as well. Overall, nothing really changing from last year, except for some of the things that we're aware of as far as when you're outside. In that regard, into try to keep kids to be required as much as possible, and we are allowed to get them in as close to 3 feet when necessary in our classroom. Based on state directives to the bus, masks is required indoors unless they're in a classroom 6 feet apart and the mask. Kids are like 3 feet apart, and next to each other's class, masks for that. Yeah, so if you have any questions for me, I know we also have some questions you want to ask some questions from Frank on the screen as well. So
Mr. Gregory, thank you for joining us. Anybody have any? Can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can hear you just fine. Can you hear me?
Yes. Anyone have any questions for Mr. Gregory from the board?
I want to know, am I speaking to this or am I speaking to the team? Which one? Okay, so I need a definition of what is actually the law versus a mandate. And whether or not the government can issue a mandate that we're liable to uphold.
Sure. So in this case, what happened is the Department of Health issued an emergency regulation on Friday. Emergency regulations have the force of law. And what that regulation said was that the Commissioner of Health was empowered to issue a decision requiring whether masks would be worn in a variety of settings, including school districts. So then the commissioner did issue a determination almost at the same time that the regulation was filed. And the commissioner said that it was his determination that masking must be worn indoors in schools at all times, and with some very limited exceptions. So it has the force of regulation, which legally is the force of, it's just, there's the force of law, which is something passed by the legislature. Just below that is the force of regulation, which is passed by an administrative agency like the Department of Education or the Department of Health. Those two things are legally binding. Everything below that are guidances, recommendations. So this meets the force of law in the sense that failure to follow it can lead to fines of up to $1,000 a day.
Okay. Go ahead.
The empowerment that you just used, who was empowered?
The regulation empowered the Commissioner of Health to make a finding and a determination, and that's what happened.
And this is a regulation from the governor?
No, it's a regulation from the Department of Health. You guys deal with Department of Health regulations all the time. Mostly for school districts, it relates to like mandatory vaccinations, vaccination process, that kind of things that you guys were doing long before COVID applied. But in this case, it's masking related to COVID.
I know the governor today mentioned about being more flexible as we move forward. Do you know, in your opinion, what she means by that?
All she means is that, well, I can't read her mind, right? But what happened is that we've got, we're issuing these rules, and because everything is happening so quickly, the rules are, for lack of a better word, too broad or too blocky, right? And so, for instance, the rule that got issued, the regulation that got issued, and the determination that got issued on Friday, which said all people, right, have to wear masks in K-12 school. There's no specific carve out, for instance, for sports. There's no, even though there is for wind instruments and singing, there's no carve out for masking breaks. There's no carve out for the administrative wing, right? So you may have a business office, and if it's in the same building as the K-12 students, then they're supposed to be wearing masks all day too, even though they are never within 50 feet of a student, right? And what's happened is they issue this broad mandate, and all these people raise, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? And the commissioner and the governor, the governor is saying, we've got to be flexible. We've got to deal with those things. But right now, the state of the law is not very flexible. We're hoping it becomes much more flexible going forward because, right, we already did this once. And we got lots of exceptions, and the rules got more flexible and easier for school districts to deal with. And then they all blew up again. And it's like we're relearning all of this. At least that's how it feels like to me on this end.
Right. One of the questions I submitted to the superintendent, and hopefully you got it earlier today, was what have you noticed, any ambiguities in these regulations, mandates, laws that you've noticed that we, as it relates to protocols that we're expected to follow? What ambiguities have you saw in that group?
I would say the problem with it is not that there are ambiguities, is that there isn't enough flexibility. It's too black and white, I think, in most cases. The biggest ambiguity that we've dealt with, where I think there really is ambiguity right now, is we've gotten lots of questions from school districts about, well, for instance, what I raised earlier, does our business office have to wear masks, right? And the issue is, it says masks indoors in K-12 buildings. Our interpretation of that is that if you have a separate administrative building where there are no students, the people in the separate administrative building don't have to wear masks. But that's an ambiguity, right? Because it goes into what's the definition of a K-12 school, and the regulations don't define it.
What do you do if a kid gets kicked out, he just won't wear his mask and with that, and you don't offer a remote option? What do the parents do in that case?
All right, so is this an ambiguity or not? There's utter silence from the regs about what you can do. And the issue is that every school district has different issues with our offering remote instruction, and many are not offering remote instruction because for a variety of reasons. We are, as a general rule, we're recommending that if a child shows up and refuses to wear a mask, first you offer them a mask. Always offer anybody who comes onto school grounds and doesn't have a mask, offer them a mask. If they refuse to wear one that's offered, at that point, they're simply refusing to follow the regulation. We recommend that you refuse to allow them entry onto school grounds, not as a violation of school rules, but as a violation of safety regulations. That means the student is absent. And same thing, if an employee comes on and refuses to wear a mask, you're not going to send them home. You're simply going to say, you can't come on campus. The reason that matters is if you send an employee home, you can only send them home with leave while the board figures out what to do. You're going to say you can't come on campus. Then they're absent without leave because they're simply refusing to follow a standard requirement of all people to get on school grounds. So from the broad point of view, the student's absent without leave. It's no different than if they decided to go to the mall that day. And the employee is absent without leave, no different than if they cut work to go do something else. You're going to track it with students. You have a comprehensive code of conduct and a comprehensive attendance policy. You're going to follow that. If the student really refuses to wear a mask, or the family refuses to have the student wear a mask, and this is going to be a long-term issue, then the family's got a choice. They're welcome to keep the student home, and then they've got to complete the path to do home instruction, or they can enroll the student somewhere else. Another school is going to have the same issue, a non-public school, not our problem, but they can try to enroll them there. Or if they don't do any of those things and provide you proof of it, then it's time to hotline them because it's educational neglect. That's a long-term process, but that's the arc that follows for repeated refusals to wear a mask.
One question I have is that on our local health department website, it says to follow CDC guidelines.
Yep.
Part of the wording on the website, there's a line that suggests that if an individual has breathing problems, not to wear a mask.
All right, so let's talk about that. So the Commissioner of Health cited the CDC guidance, but then went on to say in the determination, and this is backed by the regulations, that the person who has breathing problems, the person doesn't get to determine whether the mask rises to the level of them not getting to wear it. It's a medical issue, and they need to have the note of a medical provider. It says the rules are to be decided in accordance with New York State human rights law and the Americans with Disabilities Act. And in both of those cases, anytime a person is coming on and saying, I can't comply with the rules because of a disability I have, you have the right to say, all right, we're going to have an interactive discussion about your disability. What we need to know from, not just from you, but from your medical provider, is what is the extent of your disability, what accommodations are necessary, and you have the right to run it by your own doctor if you want, so that people are not going out and just shopping for whatever doctor they want and getting whatever answer they want. And you guys have followed this procedure frequently, or not frequently, but you followed it in the past with regard to, for instance, employees who needed some kind of accommodation completely unrelated to COVID. You followed this process for the ADA on a number of occasions, and it's going to be the same process. So a person showing up and saying, the mask makes me uncomfortable. I have a medical reason to, I can't wear it. You say, thank you for that information. Show us a medical provider's note on an RX pad that says so.
And that works for both students and employees.
Correct. Here's the thing, if a student has it, that student, if they really have it and they have a disability that interferes with their breathing, they may need to be referred to the 504 committee, or they may already be part of the have a 504 plan, right? Because masks are certainly annoying, but scientifically they don't interfere with oxygen uptake or carbon dioxide expression for the vast majority of people, to the point of that the person can't function reasonably. And if it does, that person probably has a significant disability.
Interesting.
It's kind of like, for most people, it's like wearing a tie, right? Or wearing heels. Well, shouldn't say that, I haven't worn heels, but certainly like wearing a tie. It's uncomfortable and you get used to it. If it's truly a medical condition, you have the right to inquire about it. I'm sorry, I didn't hear what.
Can you speak to the $1,000 fine piece? What is that for?
Sure. So the regulation states that failure to follow the regulation and the any determinations made as a result of the regulation are punishable under the public health law by fines of up to $1,000 per event. And both an individual and an entity can pay the fine, can be responsible for the fine. School districts, you're an entity. So for instance, if you fail to enforce it, then every single day that you fail to enforce it, you could be liable for a fine of $1,000. The regulation says it's a per day violation. So that adds up. At the same time, if you want an ambiguity, this is another ambiguity. For instance, let's say an employee refuses to wear a mask and the district allows the employee to come to work on school grounds anyway. If that gets called in and the Department of Health issues a fine, is the fine going to go to the employee? Is it going to go to the school, or is each one going to get a fine? We don't know. And it's entirely possible that, right, the Department of Health will not issue any fines, but legally they have the authority to. And this is not a new or unusual authority. Most agencies have civil authority to issue fines for violation of agency regulations.
Would the board not supporting the COVID protocols constitute a violation?
Well, it depends on what you mean by not support. If you mean we're going to enforce them, but we're going to advocate strongly that they be changed, you're enforcing them. If it means you're not going to require every single person who comes on school grounds to not wear them, then arguably, yes, you're not enforcing them, because the directive says all people on school grounds must have a mask.
Is there a particular liability on particular board members' parts if they don't support this?
So again, it depends on what you mean by not support. Let's say the board took a vote and a majority of the board voted to require the mandates to be followed, and the others and a minority voted against it. That probably doesn't matter because the board acts as a whole. If the majority of the board were to not support them, then yes, individual board members may very well likely be liable on two fronts. I don't know that you're going to be penalized with a fine until people start showing up and not wearing masks. You're told about it and you continue not to enforce it. You also all took an oath of office to follow the laws and regulations of New York, and anyone who willfully violates that is subject to removal. We've only ever seen that so far for board members who have violated the confidentiality of executive, when you're in executive session. But the process is, and in that case, the board member was removed for violating, Public Officers Law 105. The process is anybody in the school community, which means any resident of the district, can file a complaint with the Department of Education. It's an appeal to the commissioner saying, alleging that the board has refused to implement the charges. And in that case, board members who voted against it, right there on the record, is voting to refuse to enforce the law. So the question is there anybody in the community who might bring that case? That's the risk. We certainly and we dealt with this. We have a couple school districts in the western end of our area of coverage who were strongly considering passing a policy a month ago saying that they were going to refuse any mandates. And I had to give them this talk saying exactly what I'm telling you. And that was before there was $1,000 fine a day. You haven't surrendered your rights to advocate for change, right? And so if you want to get together with other school districts and contact the school boards, which is one of your lobbying arms, and it's very good at it, to advocate for change, that's perfectly fine. It's merely not enforcing the law, that actively refusing to enforce the law, that would get you in trouble.
If we were to vote that way and a child were to get sick and die, are we liable in that respect for a lawsuit?
So that's a complicated question. So let's say, right, a student or an employee comes down with COVID, they get ill and die. They sue the school district saying, I caught COVID at the school. First of all, you can get sued for that regardless of what you do, right? This is America. With $1 and a dream, anybody can sue anybody for anything. The question is, would you win or would you lose? They have to prove all 4 elements. And the toughest element they're always going to have, regardless of what you do, is they have to prove that they caught COVID at the school, as opposed to in the other 16 hours a day and the entire weekend. Like, what were they doing those times? How can they prove that they got COVID at the school? That's probably going to be pretty hard to do. Where they're going to have an easier time with is one of the elements of negligence is violation of a duty. And there's a concept called negligence per se. And that is when you refuse to follow a law and the type of harm that happens is the type of harm that's expressly covered under that law or regulation, you're automatically negligent. They still have to prove that the negligence caused the injury, but you're automatically negligent. And there's a good argument that, right, the commissioner has said COVID's dangerous, COVID in schools is dangerous, you must wear masks. If they're wearing a mask and they get caught with COVID anyway, you've got a strong defense because you have a duty to be reasonable, not a duty to prevent all harm. And if you're saying, well, we followed the law, we were reasonable, that's a pretty good defense. The moment they say, not only did you not follow the law, you actively refuse to follow the law, that makes it much easier for the plaintiff to prove you were negligent. And attached to that is, I don't know who your insurer is. We sent a legal grammar, an email out about this maybe a month ago, maybe not quite a month ago. Utica National Insurance has said that any school district that refuses to follow mandates regarding COVID may be denied coverage in one of these lawsuits because you made their job so much harder in a violation of your contract with them. If you take willful steps to increase risk, insurance companies have the right to decline coverage. And by the way, there's ambiguity in their letter, right? Their letter just said this may happen and it's on a case-by-case basis, but that's what their letter said. No other insurance company, to our knowledge, has said that so far. So if you have NYMER, we haven't seen anything from them.
We have Utica, right?
Yes, we do. That would happen to be our insurance carrier.
Any other questions? for Mr. Davis?
Ask them about the back or about just getting tested for sports. Please.
What's the legal, I'll ask it, what's the legal opinion on forcing student athletes to get tested for COVID? For
Student,
example,
to get what? Tested?
tested, like prior.
All right. So we don't have a legal opinion one way or another whether you should. We have a legal opinion that you may, right? You cannot, our opinion is that under the current law, you cannot require vaccination or testing of a student as a condition of coming to school, because that's a legal right that they have to come to school and get their education. And if they're under 16, it's their legal duty to come to school. So you can't hook it to that. But you can hook vaccination, testing, and reporting of vaccination results as a condition of doing extracurricular activities, going on field trips. I mean, not that we're seeing a lot of field trips now, but you know, in the years before COVID, you probably required students to submit their bags to being searched before they went on the senior trip or some other kind of trip to make sure that they weren't bringing illicit substances. And it's the same idea. When a student is getting to participate in a voluntary extra fun thing, you can attach conditions to it that you can't attach to regular. So you legally can, whether you want to and whether you can afford to, that's an individual district by district decision.
So my question, Randy, is what is the policy with section 2 about testing that?
Section 2 doesn't have any policy towards testing. Right now, it's our plan that we're going to ask for consent of the parents of all of our students for testing like we did last year. And we sent that out. And then for those student athletes, whose parents give us consent, we're going to, in our high risk sports, we're going to begin testing them.
And if they refuse consent, what's the policy there?
If the parents refuse,
Yeah.
right now, we don't test them. So it's right, so our plan right now is just to test kids whose parents have given us consent to have them tested, vaccinated and unvaccinated. I know some schools have made it a condition of participation, at least one school in our own league said kids either are vaccinated or they must be tested. Participate, and some schools just said, yeah, you know, vaccinated must have been done.
Randy, can you just summarize for me what sports, when in sports did you wear a mask?
Indoor sports.
Thank you.
So in the fall, that means ladies volleyball.
I have a question, Randy. Some places it says 3 feet social distancing, but then I believe I heard 6 feet in the classroom. Why are there 2 different social distancing guidelines on that?
So
And-
I'm sorry.
No, and to piggyback on that, the rule about the cafeteria is like not consistent too, not here, I just mean in general with the legal stuff that you sent around.
So last year.
Who's that a question for? I'm sorry.
Whoever wants to answer it.
Either you or Randy.
Well,
All right.
I'll go
Go ahead.
first. You can correct me if I'm wrong. That's why I have your phone number. Actually, I should call it. That's go first. With the for physical distancing, the state has said if it allows us to have everybody here in person, we can have kids 3 feet apart with masks.
With masks on at desks.
I'm sorry.
With masks on at desks.
Or anywhere, yes, they can be 3 feet. All right,
Okay.
yeah, right. Our goal is to keep 6 feet like we did last year.
And then they can have their masks removed.
That's our local guidance, is yes. It's Mr. Gregory said that's one of the things that have it said one way or the other. But they also did say that kids can play instruments at 6 feet apart. So we're interpreting that to mean you can play an instrument at 6 feet apart. You can in a, what's called a resting situation, take your mask off the bricks as well. Makes sense?
Well, I guess.
So if they're sitting at their seat in the classroom, like we talked about the last meeting you had, they can take their masks off.
They're 6 feet apart. That's what these are. I think we saw these tests at 6.
But here it says maintain 3 feet of social distancing between students and classrooms for physical distancing. Most classrooms will be able to maintain 6 feet of physical distance.
Correct.
So that means that their masks can be off at 3 feet.
No, it's 6 feet. They're 3 feet. No, but what we're gonna have our teachers do is they're gonna come up with a plan. So kids, let's say every other row, can take mask breaks, so they're 6 feet apart.
Maybe we need a clause just on that, please.
Well, this is a summary, there's more detail.
Because I hear this reference.
But I'm still confused because in the same synopsis, it has 3 feet and 6 feet.
Yeah.
So if kids are 3 feet, they should have their mask on. If they're
Within
6 feet, they
3
can take their mask off.
Okay, that's not how I
So I
read
would,
this.
I would add that. If that's what we're doing. There are some. People want to know where, when and where can they take the mask?
Right.
Right, and I also think we need to address the adults that work in this building too, because if the kids have to do it, and if we have to vote that way because we're legally bound to vote that way, it needs to be consistent. People can't be walking around with their mask like this, like, and it's not for having like a gator on or anything like that. We need to have, if it's all of us, it's all of us. You know what I mean? It's not fair.
That's the expectation.
Yeah, that page.
Anything else for Mr. Burke? Is this something the board has to vote on? It just becomes, it's in effect as of the 27th.
That's right, yeah.
It's just in effect. Okay. Right.
I can't, well, hold on. Is there a waiver that can be signed by parents that can release the school district of any? Like, how does that work? Like, if a parent, so my body, my choice, right? So if I don't want to wear a mask at my place of employment or have my son who has been vaccinated wear a mask at school, can I sign a waiver that releases the school of any liability? Or, okay, or if I had another child that wasn't vaccinated, but I didn't want them to have to wear a mask. So there's no way I can write a waiver, or a parent could sign a waiver that releases if they got sick.
No, it would be like asking, there's no waiver process. The reason behind that, I can only speculate as to. My guess is because the Department of Health looks this as a group effort. And when you refuse to wear a mask, it's not just increasing your own infection risk, it's increasing everyone else's infection risk. So they're not allowing people to opt out, right? And the problem was, from the Department of Health's point of view and the CDC's point of view, when it was voluntary, so many people opted out, it gave COVID new life. And we're seeing an upswing. And so they're working very hard to stamp that out.
Did I actually? I guess, okay. Sorry.
Just clarify, Dan, these regulations went into effect when?
They went into effect on Friday, August 27th in the evening. Can't tell you exactly what time, but the moment they were filed with the Department of State, they became effective. And now they're emergency regulations. And that means that they're going to be subject to review and to challenge and rewriting. But for right now, they're the law of the land.
Is there a comment period on the website, on the Department of Health website for people to?
There isn't, but there will be. So when a regulation is published, and it's going to be put out in the next register, which is New York State's mechanism for publishing all of these proposed regulations. There will be a comment period then. It will specify what the comment period is, which is probably going to be 35, 45, 30, 45, or 60 days. And there'll be an opportunity for all these comments to be filed because an emergency regulation expires pretty quickly. And to renew it, it has to consider all the comments. So that will be a mechanism to try to change it to make it more flexible and make it actually work better for school districts.
So these regulations are during the day when kids are in class. Also, they would include activities at night, which would include school board meetings.
The regulation is all people on grounds of a K-12 school. There's no exception for time of day. There's no.
If we doesn't have a mask on at this meeting, we're in violation.
That's correct. If you want to have it at the firehouse, then you don't have to wear a mask under this regulation.
But as long as we're 6 feet apart at this meeting, they're okay.
Well, that's not explicitly true. A lot of people are carving that out, and I think there's a good chance that you'll get away with it. The regulation and the determination don't have any distance requirements except for eating, drinking, singing, and playing a wind instrument. It says you can remove the mask and stay 6 feet apart. And then there was a comment, another guidance from an attorney at the governor's office who said, remember, all of these rules are done in line with the CDC recommendations, and the CD recommendations say it's more important that kids come to in-person instruction than 6 feet distancing be maintained. So if you can't do the 6 feet, then you still serve them lunch and have them come in school. There's no explicit, if they're 6 feet apart, they can take their mask off. But again, a lot of schools are talking about doing that because the rule is so rigid.
Anything else from the board for Mr. Gregory?
So in this case, the regulation is the law. Is that what we're hearing? So, sorry, in this case, regulation that is being put out is the law.
That's correct.
Are we in an emergency right now?
It's not a law.
Okay, so that we're not in a state of emergency, so what does that mean?
All right, so laws are passed by the legislature and signed by the governor. Regulations are passed by an agency. And if a regulation cannot contradict a law. So in that way, they're lower. Kind of think along the way that you can pass a board policy. Your board policy is the law in the generic sense for what happens on school grounds, right? But it can't contradict the legislature. You can't make stealing legal on school grounds because the legislature has said stealing's illegal. In the case of agencies, the legislature has literally passed a law saying, Department of Health, you're allowed to pass regulations which have the authority of law with regard to health topics. And then they created a process. So regulations have the force of law in the sense that the government can penalize you, include putting you in jail for violating them. In this case, they have not said that they have not issued a penalty of going to jail under the old, by the way, this replaced the old rule. Under the old rule, you could get a $500 fine or 15 days in jail. Now they don't say jail this time, they just say $1,000 fine and it's $1,000 a day. But yes, so the police aren't going to come and take anybody away in handcuffs, but the Department of Health will come and issue you legal paperwork and issue you fines. And if you fail to follow them, then the courts will step in to enforce it. So it's the law in the common sense term, but technically it's a regulation.
Thank you, Mr. Gregory.
Yeah, I know this was a very cheery speech.
Yeah, yeah. Welcome to stay. I'm just gonna read off the folks that communicated by email or letter with the board. And Mr. Squire will respond as necessary. Dina Alvera, Robert Wickham, Peter Hussey, Michelle McElroy, Christina Burnell, Lori Wilson, Robin Wickham, Abby Martin, Missy Fitzpatrick, Karen Taylor, Michelle Wyatt, Robin Wickham, Robin. And do we have any comment? Michelle Lyons? Is Michelle here?
Yeah.
Come right up.
Yeah, I'm number 8 for the non-residency.
Yeah.
So that was approved, correct?
Yes.
On here, it says the 21-22 school year. So am I gonna have to keep coming back here to get approved, or is this gonna go forward? Oh, okay, okay. And then am I gonna have any issues with the school bus?
That I can't answer.
Okay, because I heard like, if you're a non-resident, you have to provide your own transportation, but the bus is the only bus that goes by my house. So I'm assuming that's not going to be an issue. Okay, so call him.
They've been picking them up
Okay.
for years.
What?
They've been picking them up.
Yep, since 2008,
Okay.
since I moved to the area. And it's the only bus that goes by my house. Kara's never gone by it. So, okay, as long as I was approved. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt. Do you need me here any longer?
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
I think he's asking, do you need any?
Oh, do we need it? No, I think we're good. Thank you very much.
all right, thank you and good night.
Okay, without any other public comments, establishment of future meetings, we have a Board of Education meeting September 16th, 2021. 6:30, high school library, presentation meeting October 7th, 2021, 6 p.m., high school library. Motion to adjourn. Second. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed, so carried. Thank you very much, everybody.